Next, I want to create some rectangular graphic elements across the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to press G on the keyboard to bring up my pen tool, or you can come up here and select the pen tool. And I'll click once on the bottom here, and if I hold Shift and click on the other side, we'll create a perfectly straight line. I actually don't need the fill, so I can turn that off by pressing Alt as it cycles through these options until I get this red line and we don't have the fill. And I'll turn the stroke down to something like 5 because we don't need it to be so large. And now, we can come into the stroke here inside our shape layer and come down to here where it says dashes. I could just press plus to add a dash. I'll turn off my masks so you can see what we just did. So this is our original stroke. If I press plus, I'll have added a dash. Now you can change the size of the dash by coming into this first dash option, and we can make them longer. And if we want, we can play with the offset, and that just moves them along the length of our stroke. I also think we can make our stroke a little thicker for this first one, maybe something like 8. Maybe make our dashes something like 75, or maybe down to 70. That looks pretty good. I want each of these dashes to have its own color from black to white, but I can't isolate any one of these independently. So I'm going to go ahead and press U to hide all its parameters. So what I want to do is I want to create a new solid. So I'll press Command Y on the keyboard, or come up to Layer, New, Solid. We'll make this the full size of the composition. And we'll just call this Ramp. We'll take this, we'll throw it under our shape layer here. We'll come into our effects panel. I'll type in Ramp, double click the gradient ramp, and you can see now we have a gradient that goes from black all the way to white. This is what we want, but I want to go from left to right. So I'm going to select this target here for the start of the ramp. I'm going to make that start to the left of our first square and end to the right of our last square. And now, what I want to do is, I don't actually see the tool I want, so I'll come down here to toggle switches / modes. And I'll take this, I'll take the ramp, and I'll set this track matte from no track matte to Luma matte. And now you can see we have a gradient that goes from dark to light that's only occupying the space of our shape layer. So what I want to do now is I want to make a second one of these. So I'll select both our elements. I'll duplicate them both by pressing Command D on the keyboard. I'm going to move our new shape layer up. So I can press the up arrow, or if I press Shift and the up arrow, I'll move it at 10 pixels at a time. So I want to come in to our contents here and into our stroke. And I want to change the way this looks to add a little variation. So I'm just going to add another dash. And maybe even one more. And now you can see we've created a completely different look. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn this width down to about half the width and make that 4. And if we want, we can even come into our second ramp and we can click Swap Colors. And now our gradient has white on the left and black on the right. And you can play with the parameters of the dashes, the size of the dashes, or the amount of space in between to get a look that you like. You can even play around with adding more dashes. This is all to taste. So there's one last thing I want to do, also using track mattes, because you can see now that our element, if we begin to offset it, actually comes to the outside of our border. So what I need to do is I need to pre-compose first stroke effect by pressing Shift Command C on the keyboard, or coming up to Layer, Pre-compose. I'll call this Stroke 1. I'm going to do the same for our second stroke by selecting both these elements, pressing Shift Command C. We're going up to Layer, Pre-compose. I'll call this Stroke 2. Now I'll take our initial rectangle, I'll duplicate that by pressing Command D on the keyboard, or going up to Edit, Duplicate. I'll throw that on top of our second stroke. I'll take this stroke composition And in our track matte panel, I'll select Alpha Matte Rectangle 2. And if you see, our shape has now been cut off around the edges of where that rectangle is. But for some reason, our color changed. That reason is simply because the opacity of our rectangle has been set all the way down to 10%. So if we just drag that back up to 100, we can restore our original color. So I'm going to duplicate this rectangle again by pressing Command D. I'm going to Edit, Duplicate, dragging this above our first stroke. I'm going to do the same thing with our Alpha Matte. Now when we animate later, we can do all the animation we want and it'll stay within the boundaries of our rectangle. And remember that we pre-composed this entire layer earlier, so if we pop back into our render comp, we can now see that our entire comp has now this cool bulge to it.